Yeah, so I was just asked what we're going to do after we learn Sotah. So this is what I'm thinking at the moment. The last, it's something I thought about even before we did Sotah, but I'm thinking about it now and love to hear feedback. The last chapter of Psachim. Psachim is a rather large tractate that discusses the laws of Pesach. And it includes in there at the beginning the laws of Chametz, searching for Chametz, the laws of Chametz itself, the laws of Matzah. Sorry?
I'm doing that with Kudan now.
Which you're doing chapter 1.
Yeah.
About the search for Chametz, right? Yeah. That's chapter 1. Then later gets to making the Matzah. And then it gets to the Korban Pesach, the offering in the temple. In the last chapter, called Arvei Psachim, which means the evenings of Pesach, it goes through the procedure of the evening of Pesach, starting from Mincha on Erev Pesach in the afternoon, all the way through the whole Seder night. So our entire Seder is derived from that last tractate, the last chapter of the tractate of Psachim. There's a lot to go on there, specifically on the halachic level, because obviously the night of the Seder is very detailed in its halacha. But also have the halachas of Kiddush come out from there because it goes through the laws of Kiddush. Havdalah also, because it goes through the Havdalah. If the Seder night is Saturday night, you're doing both Kiddush and Havdalah. It goes through the laws of course, the Seder night itself, laws of Mincha Erev Shabbos, connected to Mincha Erev Yom Tif. So there's a lot of practical element to it. Sorry? A lot of practical things in there, which is kind of what we've been doing here, is either halachic or like midrashic in nature. So Sotah is kind of more on the midrashic side for the most part. And maybe we can go now halacha in nature, which is like we once did like Chanukah, which is very practical halacha, the laws of the menorah. We had that once. Yeah. So I wanted the halachas of the night of the Seder. And this is how I would like to do it. Is Gemara, just go into the Gemara as we always do. And then at relevant times, we'll look at the Alter Rebbe, the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law by the Alter Rebbe, codifying that which we learned in the Gemara, which will of course fill in much more, because between the Gemara and the Alter Rebbe is a couple hundred years. And in those centuries, there's been lots of opinions and written about it. And the Alter Rebbe doesn't just give conclusions halachically, but also brings the background and opinions. So in learning Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, what we'll get is a summary of all the opinions of how to derive the practical law from the Gemara, and then his practical ruling. And then from there, I want to go to the Rebbe's commentary on the Haggadah. Not the whole commentary, because most of the commentary goes on like the text of the Haggadah and sometimes the extrapolative meaning, which is not halachic in nature. But there are passages in the Rebbe's Haggadah where he takes from the Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, synthesizes it, extracts its practical application, as it is in the Haggadah, and specifically with the bent toward Chabad custom. So what we'll have is the Gemara, summary of halacha and Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, and then like the Chabad custom in the Rebbe's Haggadah. So it might take us quite a while to get through all of that. I imagine it will, but I think it could be something we might enjoy here. So you asked me what we're doing after Sotah, that's what I think I'm going to do. So the feedback is...
And the nice part is that you're doing Sotah when Sotah has another 20 some odd pages. So
right. So Sotah is being taught now in Daf Yomi and in the Chabad custom.
I'm doing both at the
right.
For a second time, actually.
And in the Chabad custom, it's to learn Sotah between Pesach and Shavuos. So we have that too.
And all the coincidences we have
divine providence, yeah.
Mishneh Torah also, with regard to what's being done.
One thing I don't understand about Pesach is that we have to, with a candle, we have to go around and search for chametz.
Yeah.
So that our house is completely free of chametz, right?
Yeah.
And then you have the Seder night and you invite several people. Some you don't know. I mean, you know them, but you don't know their lifestyle. They might take it lightly. They might take.
I had people bring me gifts of chametz on Pesach.
Yeah. So what do you do?
Yeah.
It's a big problem. So first of all, you have a mitzvah to check. You'll talk to Rabbi Kudan about this, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but you have a mitzvah to search your house for chametz anyway. So it's a mitzvah you have to fulfill, and you'll do it. Now, if someone brings chametz to your home.
Not even that. If they have chametz crumbs on them.
Right. So if they have chametz crumbs on them, it's not your. It doesn't belong to you. It's not your property. But if some
carpet.
It's not your property though, and you don't acquire ownership, especially if it's little crumbs that you care nothing for, and so you don't. There's no acquisition of the property, which is really the problem. The issue is when someone brings you a gift, right? And you cannot indicate. I had someone bring a bottle of vodka once, and I had someone bring me a dessert of cookies.
Right. Oh, wow.
What do you do? So you cannot say anything that indicates your pleasure at having received it. So what I did was exaggerated my thank you for coming, ignoring the fact that they brought the gift and just kind of like motioned to leave it. So I didn't take it from them; they just left it, and it's actually muktzah. On Yom Tov, you're not allowed to touch it. You can't even touch it or move it. You'll touch it maybe, but you can't move it certainly, because the halacha is anything you cannot enjoy over Yom Tov becomes muktzah, right? That's the premise of muktzah. So chametz you have no use for in Pesach, it's certainly muktzah. So you can't even, so it just sits there, and that's at some point you cover it so that it doesn't get, God forbid, taken by your kids or something. And when Pesach is over, when Yom Tov is over, before Chol Hamoed, or Matzah Pesach, Matzah Yom Tov going into Chol Hamoed, I took it and threw it into well, you could do that. In this case, I threw it into the city's garbage, like like at the park.
Right.
So it doesn't belong.
Right here.
Whatever, anything that belongs to the city.
That's during Chol Hamoed?
Yeah. So I like in my mind, I made a specific like announcement in my head. I am not taking ownership of this, and I cannot verbalize my thank you and even them giving it, because that indicates I can't thank you. I can't thank them after Yom Tov either. Right? Nor can I use it after Yom Tov. I have to dispose of it and off my property specifically. Yeah, that's
The hard part was not being able to receive it from them.
That's the hard part. So you just exaggerate. Thank you for coming. So nice you're here. I'm so thankful. So happy you're here. I just put it down. I'm so thankful you're here. Like at the point when they're expecting you to thank them for the gift, you say thank you to them for coming again. That's how I did it, just to avoid that. So it is an issue. Okay, let's get back to our Gemara. So I want to share with you before we get to the Mishnah some history that is relevant to understanding the next Mishnah. Because again, the Mishnahs here and the Gemara that follows is discussing the degeneration of the generations. And as times got worse, different things changed, right? What do we have? We had nicer ending. Well, till now, actually, we're not halachic inclinations. They were
drinking.
The Sotah. It started. The whole discussion started from the Sotah stopped. The Rufa stopped. Right, different things that stopped over as generations degenerated. Now, the Gemara then is going to get to now a specific point in history that led to the destruction of the temple and the things that stopped accordingly. Most of it is related to joy and fanfare around Jewish observance that stopped, considering the fact that we've gone into a worse state. We had this with respect to music, right? The music, willy-nilly, just enjoyment of music that isn't related to work or Torah connection is forbidden, right? But it used to be okay. Once Sanhedrin ended, it was stopped, right? So different things of that nature. So the history I want to share with you, it's important for our Gemara, is the following. As I'm reading, I've recommended this book more than once, the Art Scrolls Introduction to the Talmud, the full book Introduction to the Talmud. Very, very, very good book that I've recommended here before. So in the beginning of the book, they have a section on a history of the Talmudic era. And they begin their history with the building of the second temple. And that's when the prophets end and the era of what later becomes codified in the Mishnah begins. So they begin with that. And as they get towards the end of the second temple period, they get more and more detailed. Well, so we know more and more about that as the time goes on. So that's where they zoom in. So what's relevant for here is that after the Maccabean revolt, basically within a generation, the Maccabees become corrupt. They take power, and they becomes the Hashmonaim line, the Hasmoneans, as it might be called, the Hasmoneans. And the line of the Hasmonean kings was, for the most part, very corrupt. And then that was replaced by the Herodian line, equally corrupt, which leads to the destruction of the temple. Okay? Which is one of the reasons why the Mishnah does not include the laws of Hanukkah. This is because of Yehuda HaNasi, compiler of the Mishnah, is from the line of David. You mentioned before Rambam. Rambam has a line going back to David because he had a line that went back to Yehuda HaNasi, Yehuda the prince, And Yehuda Nasi goes back to King David, which means Rambam could trace himself back to Adam and Eve, right? Because King David can go back to Adam and Eve. So if you can go back to King David, you can go back to Adam and Eve. It's pretty remarkable.
In those days.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. There's different people who can do that. The Maral was able to do that. And the line of Chabad rabbis can do the same because they go back to the Maral, and the Maral went back to King David. So it's a pretty remarkable thing. Now, the point is, Yehuda Nasi, as the line of David, felt correctly that by Jewish law, as actually codified in Rambam, sovereignty of the Jewish people is to stay in the line of David. Once Hashem anointed King David as king, it's for him and his children forever, not to be replaced by anybody else. And indeed, the Nasis, with the Nasi included, right? It was father, son, father, son. He had a father Shimon, father Gamliel, father Shimon, father Gamliel, father Shimon, Hillel the elder, right? It goes back. And then after Nasi goes down forward also. Even as the Jews get into exile in Babylonia, the exilarch, the Reish Galusa, stayed in that line, in the Davidic line. Now, the Chashmonaim were, of course, from the Kohanic line. Like the Maccabees were Kohanim, Yochanan Kohen Gadol, and his sons. Right? So, Yehuda Nasi correctly felt that after their revolt, they should have given the sovereignty back to the line of David, which there were. And at some points, they even worked side by side. The head of the Sanhedrin, which came from the line of David, worked side by side with the local kings, with the Hasmonean kings, for brief periods.
So they were both Kohanim and king at the same time.
Correct. Which led to a big corruption.
That's a balance of power.
That's a breach of the balance of power, and right for corruption.
Sure.
Because they have both. Right. They have the kingship, the sovereignty, and the priesthood. And if you remember, by Jewish law, to go to war, you need the priesthood, you need the Sanhedrin, you need the king. That's like the balance of power.
Separation of power.
The separation of powers in Torah is the priesthood, the sovereignty, and the Sanhedrin. Those are the three branches of power that balance each other out. And here, there's a power grab when you have both king and high priest. We had this earlier with one of the people in the Hasmonean line, whose name was Antigonus, right? Antigonus, what was it? That's who we learned about earlier?
Yeah.
Isn't that who we learned about earlier? Or Aspasianus is coming up. Antigonus, right? What's his name, Noon? We had it in the Gemara there.
I do remember.
Yeah, who had this power grab?
Yeah.
No, it's not Antigonus. It's give me. Sorry, it's gonna bug me. Maybe it is Antigonus. We had it with the story with the Hakel, right? The whole story with the Hakel business, right? There's a story about the Hakel. It's gonna be up here somewhere. Right here, Agrippas. There it is, Agrippas, not Antigonus. Agrippas, that's who it was. Yeah, so we had this is the corruption of power. Now, there was a brief period during the Hasmonean line where they had a good monarch, but it wasn't a he, it was a she. And she's still a hero in Jewish history named Shlom Tzion HaMalka. Shlom Tzion, Shlomit. Shlom Tzion, the queen. Shlomit, that's her name. Shlomis, or Shlom Tzion, Queen Shlom Tzion. Mm-hmm. And she succeeded her husband, who was not such a good king. Now, here goes like this. Now I'm going to start reading from this wonderful book. So not long after, okay, what's it now? Now, she had two sons. Let's don't see them before we get to this. She had two sons, Aristobulus and Hyrcanus. These are her two sons. Hyrcanus was of a quiet disposition and served as the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. I'm reading from here. But Aristobulus, her younger son, was different. He was hot-tempered and ambitious man. For this reason, his mother had not appointed him to the position of power. The Sadducees, you know what the Sadducees are? The Sadducees are the breakaway from the
kind of like the Samaritan.
The Karaites, more like the Karaites.
Yeah, like
not the Karaites. Karaites. Yeah, they only believe in the written law.
They're still around, no?
carrots?
There might still be some carrots around. I don't know how many there are left.
There are in Israel.
There are some carrots in Israel? No way. Interesting. So the Sadducees were like a breakaway, which they only believed in the written tradition, not in the oral tradition. And the truth is that they were not really super observant to begin with. This whole notion of let's believe in the written law, not the oral tradition, was basically just a philosophical way of undermining the sages and gaining some popularity. Because if they came and said, "Do away with Torah," no one would listen to them. But they cloaked themselves into this philosophy. But they were essentially
sort of interfered with the declaring the new months, right?
Interfered with that. Interfered with a lot of things. Yes, but they essentially were, for the most part, they cozied up to the Romans. So they were the corrupting political group.
How
Right.
come they all had Roman names?
Why not? Just like you have Jews today who take.
There's approximately 40,000 in Israel today.
Oh my
And I
gosh!
know
Wow.
because my cousin was dating
A carrot girl. Oh my gosh!
His
That's
dad was like,
furious.
"There's no way, it's not happening." When they broke it off.
I didn't know that.
Tahina.
Sorry.
Well known in Israel for making tahinas.
Oh no way.
They still have a small.
Okay, let's read forward because you're not going to be able to get through this. Let's see. Okay, so the Sadducees, that this group of Jews, shrewdly reasoned that they could gain power by manipulating the unstable Aristobulus, the younger brother. When they approached him for help, he eagerly responded to their request, thinking that he could use them as stepping stones to the throne. Aristobulus went to his mother and demanded that she turn over all the fortresses in the land to him and the Sadducee leaders. He threatened that should she refuse, he and his associates would ally themselves with Aretas, the king of the Arabs, and a bitter enemy of the Jews. The old queen lacked the strength and energy to withstand her son's pressure and complied with his request. Only 3 fortresses in which their royal treasure was kept remained under her control. So while the older, better son is high priest, the younger son's grabbing power of the army. Essentially, the fortresses meant the army, with the backing of the Sadducees. Not long thereafter, Shlomis Alexandra, or Shlom Tzion, was stricken with her fatal illness. Aristobulus had the Sadducees army army's commanders seize the remaining fortresses and hand them over to him. He used the vast fortune that was stored there to build up an army to help seize the throne. The death of Queen Shlomis ended the only golden era during the time of the Second Temple, and it ushered in a century of almost unrivaled disaster. So this is the one brief period of good reign under Queen Shlomis. It's like 10 or 12 years. It's very short. Basically, from the Maccabean revolt, when the first generation of Maccabees were in control, that was good. Once they died, shortly thereafter, corruption, Shlom Tzion, and then corruption. Okay? So after this, a civil war broke out between the 2 brothers, Aristobulus and Hyrcanus, over the succession to the throne. This confrontation was bloody, and it led to the end of Judea's independence and eventually to the destruction of the Holy Temple and a long exile of the Jewish people from its homeland. So again, you're seeing that when the Talmud says that the Second Temple was destroyed because of lack of love between the Jewish people, it's not just like a punishment. Jews were fighting, so God punished them. But quite literally, what led to the destruction was not the Romans, but the infighting amongst Jews. You have to remember the Romans are the forebearers of the modern mafia. The modern mafia couldn't care what your beliefs are. Just give us the money, and we'll give you protection. We don't care what you do. Just make sure the envelope is thick. The Romans are the same way. Just pay tribute. You don't care what you believe. The Greeks cared. The Greeks wanted to know what you believe in this God, you believe in that God, or do you believe in the Olympics and not. The Greeks were much more assimilative. Right? That was a struggle of Hanukkah time. But the Romans who succeeded the Greeks really didn't care. The Jews themselves, many at least, willfully assimilated. Right? The building of Caesarea, which is a big tourist attraction in Israel, is really a sad chapter in Jewish history because it's built by Caesarea.
Herod, right?
It's sorry?
Built by Herod.
It was built by Herod. Why did he build it? He built this. He was a major architect, right? He built the Western Wall. He built it because he wanted to distract attention from Jerusalem and make Caesarea, this great port city of culture, that should be the center of Israel. It was the Romanification of Israel.
Right.
It was him sucking up to the Romans. The Romans themselves actually couldn't care. Just pay us your dues and we don't care. But because the Jews were infighting and fighting is bad for business, that's why the Romans quashed them. Because really the Romans couldn't care less.
Is there anything wrong with like going to get married today?
In Caesarea?
Yes.
Nothing wrong. I'm just saying why it's not like so popular amongst like religious Jews as a tourist attraction is because it's like the symbol of the secularification of Jews, or the Romanification, which is why he felt so bad, and the whole story. Not for now, why he renovated the temple to bring back attention to the temple because he felt bad about what he had done, specifically killing a bunch of sages, along with building Caesarea, turning it into this world-class port. Really, it was like a world-class port at the time, right? It's right at the center of the Mediterranean. Israel's right at the center of the Mediterranean. So if you're doing shipping, this was like the center. It was between that and Alexandria. Alexandria were like the two big ports of that era. Anyway, okay, sorry.
The reason why Hanukkah is not part of the Mishnah.
That's the reason why Hanukkah is not part of the Mishnah, because we're the Nasi didn't like what the Maccabees did. So it's mentioned in the Mishnah a few times, but the halachas of Hanukkah aren't there. There's no tractate Menorah, tractate Hanukkah, as there is tractate Megillah, right? Okay, so this is now Shlom dies and the civil war breaks out. The struggle between Hyrcanus and Aristobulus for the throne of Israel began while their mother Shlomis was still alive, and it lasted for several years, from the year 68 to 63 BCE. After her death, the dispute erupted into open war. Aristobulus was under the influence of the Sadducees, who supported him in the fight against his brother. Hyrcanus became friendly with Antipater, who was one of the Edomites who had been forced to convert to Judaism by Yochanan. Story from the time. Another group of Jews who were disgruntled with their relationship with Judaism because they were, to begin with, enemies, and Yochanan thinking that the way to get them to stop being enemies was to force them to convert. So they were like forced into Judaism, and they were resentful about it. So they essentially, the two brothers sided themselves with two groups of Jews that didn't like being Jewish, right? Aristobulus with the Sadducees and Hyrcanus with the Edomites. While the Jews themselves, following the sages, were like stuck in the middle of this whole conflict. So Antipater was cunning and power-hungry man whom King Yanai had appointed governor of Edom. King Yanai was king earlier, the husband of Shlomis, I think. Yes. So it's the king before the mother Shlom. Okay, so by exploiting his alliance with the soft-hearted Hyrcanus, Antipater expected to further his own ambition, which is no less than to become ruler of the land himself. Thus, the Jewish people became pawns in a power struggle between their spiritual enemies, the Sadducees on one side and the scheming Edomite on the other side. The last testament of King Shlomis declared Hyrcanus, which is the older brother, the more soft brother, who's now aligned with the Edomites, to be the legal rule of the land. But Aristobulus raised a large army against his brother and was able to take control of Jerusalem. However, he was soon forced into retreat with his followers into the area of the temple. So get this. Aristobulus attacks Jerusalem, conquers Jerusalem. His brother then surrounds Jerusalem and forces him into a corner into Temple Mount. So Aristobulus' brother A, the younger brother, is stuck inside the Temple Mount, while the older brother Hyrcanus with the Edomites are surrounding him. Brother against brother. When the soldiers of Hyrcanus laid siege to the Temple Mount, they brought Choni, the circle maker, to curse the men of Aristobulus. Choni being the famous miracle worker of the Talmud. It was well known that Choni's prayer was accepted in heaven, so they brought him by force to the scene of the battle between the two brothers. That is to say, the brothers on the outside, Hyrcanus. They brought Choni to curse Aristobulus, the younger brother who's inside the Temple Mount. When Choni saw that he could not get away from there, he doesn't want to curse Aristobulus because that's not good, and he doesn't want to not curse him because Hyrcanus is going to kill him. Right? He's stuck in between. What does he do? So he spoke as follows, quote, this is from Josephus. Master of the universe, those who lay siege are your people, and those who are besieged are your priests. I plead before you, do not heed the prayers of either side to do evil to the other side. Placating both sides, because that's what he wants. He wants the whole thing to end. So during the siege of the temple area, the number of livestock needs for the temple often dwindled. Because how many animals can you have in the Temple Mount area when you're being besieged? So you got to import animals from the outside if you want to do the daily offering, which is what the brother on the inside, Aristobulus, wanted to do, because that would be his way of, right? He's sided with the Sadducees, right? Aristobulus with the Sadducees. The Sadducees still believe in offerings. It's in the temple. If he wants their support, he has to keep on doing sacrifices. Otherwise, what kind of ruler are you? Right? And now the number of offerings are dwindling because how many animals can you housed in the Temple Mount under siege. That's right. So Hyrcanus and the besiegers were ready to, so now the people on the outside, the besiegers, Hyrcanus, were ready to supply the animals, but only for an enormous price. Finally, there came an incident which the Talmud reports in 3 different places. And now we're quoting from our Gemara that we're about to read on 49b. Now we're reading from our Gemara, which reads, the rabbis taught, it's not in the Mishnah, it's later in the Gemara. It's in the Gemara, which is commenting on our Mishnah, so I'm giving this background. The rabbis taught, when the Hasmoneans fought one another, referring to Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, Hyrcanus was outside of the Temple Mount, and Aristobulus inside. Every day they lowered a basket with dinars, meaning the people on the inside, Aristobulus, lowered a basket with dinars, that's cash, and lifted up animals needed for the daily offerings. So they would put money, in an exorbitant amount of money into the, right, Aristobulus was the one who took control of the fortresses, right?
Complete the treasury.
That's right. Aristobulus is the one that took control of the cash of the fortresses, notwithstanding his mother's,
From his brother.
right? So he had lots of money. So he puts lots of money into the basket, lowers it over the wall, and his brother takes the money and puts in an animal, which they take back over and offer it in the temple. There was an old man, learned in Greek wisdom, who told the besiegers, as long as they continue the temple service, they will not be delivered into your hand. So someone on the outside who speaks Greek, okay, this is important because he's able to communicate to the Romans, as we'll see. He spoke Greek at the time. He tells them, look, you guys are supplying them with animals for the offering because you want the money. But you don't realize that when you do that, that gives them divine favor. So as long as they're doing offerings, you're not going to be able to get them. So you're shooting yourself in the leg by this cash collection. So the next day, when the defenders lowered the basket with dinars, the besiegers sent up a pig. It was their way of saying, thanks for the money, but the supply comes to an end now. They get a pig. When it reached halfway up the wall, the pig stuck its hooves into the wall. In other words, it was the divine way of saying, this ain't entering the Temple Mount. Right? The guys on the inside pulling it up had no idea what they were pulling up.
Until a certain point, right?
They didn't know what they were pulling up. But halfway up, the pig sticks its hooves into the wall and says, I'm not moving, which is the divine way of saying, that is not entering in this home, in this temple. So the Gemara says, the pig stuck its hooves into the wall, and the land of Israel shook for an area of 400 parses by 400 parses. The land shook. Whether that's metaphor, literally, it means like this was a shocking moment. Okay. Now back to the commentary of this, and we'll conclude with this because this is the main part of the story that we need to get to. Hyrcanus, who's on the outside, enlisted the help of the Romans, who were then in possession of Syria. So, some background: Israel is right between when the Greeks when Alexander died and the Greeks split power between the Assyrians, the Egyptians, and all the others. Israel became like the border between the Assyrian Greeks and the Egyptian Greeks. And there was constantly this like struggle between the two as to who was going to be in charge. And kings in Israel had to like learn to play both sides, just in case one came into power over the other, they shouldn't be crushed for having aligned with the other side. And there's a whole guessing game, like who you going to align yourself with? With the Ptolemies in the south, like in the southwest in Egypt, or to the Assyrian Greeks, and this power struggle lasted all the way into the Roman era as well. So the Romans now are in Syria, which is to the northeast, right to the east. Yeah. Well, I'm not northeast. Syria is just east. Northeast would be like Babylonia. Okay, so the Roman general Pompey, you heard of Pompey, the one who was first allied with and then fought with Julius Caesar, right? So he's off winning battles while his partner Caesar is seizing control of Rome. Yeah. So during that time, this is when Hyrcanus enlists the help of Pompey, the Romans, right? So the Roman general Pompey came to Israel on behalf of Hyrcanus. When the latter returned to Damascus, as to say Pompey goes back to Damascus in Syria, he summoned the two brothers to appear personally and laid their case before him and settled the dispute. Again, the Romans couldn't care which side, they just want the envelope to be thick. And infighting is bad for business. So both you guys, I'm going to settle the score. Aristobulus argued that the kingdom belonged to him, as he was by far the more qualified of the two brothers to rule. This is the younger brother who allied with the Sadducees. Hyrcanus, the older brother who allied with the Edomites, who was on the inside of the temple, claim, Hyrcanus's claim was that the late queen, Shalom Tzion, had willed her older son, Hyrcanus, to be her successor on the throne. That's what she left in her will. Pompey, of course, was guided by neither justice nor by the claims of the two brothers, but by the interests of Rome, which was cash. Because he intended to impose the imperial rule of Rome upon the land of Judea, he preferred Hyrcanus, the weaker and more submissive of the two brothers. It would be easier to collect tribute. Pompey declared that Hyrcanus was to be both king and Kohen Gadol. Again, this power grab corruption. Instead of having two offices, have one office who controls the temple and controls the land, and this is the easiest way, and the check will be on time. That's Pompey's thinking. So Pompey declared that Hyrcanus was to be both king and Kohen Gadol, and demanded that Aristobulus surrender to him all the fortresses in the land. That's where the cash is at, is in the fortresses and the armies. Aristobulus gave into these demands, but his men refused to submit. So he gave in. He must have been bought out, or he was afraid, or who knows what. But his men were like, no way. And the Romans sent an army to take control of Jerusalem. So again, you see infighting leads to destruction, quite literally. Even when the Roman legions were marching on Jerusalem, the camps of the two hostile brothers refused to unite, even against the common enemy. Hyrcanus's men, who considered Pompey their ally, opened the city gates to him. Pompey, you chose us as the leader, no problem, you come right in. They literally didn't even have to fight. The Romans didn't have to fight their way in. They were invited in, right? Which is to their own demise sometime later. While Aristobulus' soldiers withdrew behind the fortresses of the Temple Mount. So now Aristobulus is back into the Temple Mount. While the brother Hyrcanus, again, is inviting Pompey, or Rome. Many people were killed in the fighting, including many Kohanim who were serving in the temple. Pompey and his soldiers penetrated the Temple Mount and even entered the sanctuary, but did not desecrate it or any of its holy vessels. Presumably they did that because they wanted to keep Hyrcanus as their ally to get that money. And destroying the temple would mean they lose all support in Israel. So they entered the temple to get rid of the enemies, but they didn't desecrate it. After his victory, Pompey left the land. Hyrcanus was reaffirmed as Kohen Gadol and ruler. Aristobulus and his two sons and two daughters were taken as captives to Rome. Although Hyrcanus had been affirmed the nominal king, his cunning Edomite advisor Antipater held the real power. In conclusion, the city of Jerusalem had suffered from all of the infighting of the last several years. Its walls had been breached in many places, and heavy taxes had been imposed upon its residents. In addition, a tributary tax was laid upon the land and the entire land. In effect, the civil war of Hyrcanus' rash decision to enlist the support of the Romans put an end to Judean political independence. Henceforth, land of Israel became a vassal state of the Roman Empire, whose king ruled only by the grace of Rome. The true victors of the civil war between the brothers were the Romans. So this is the background for the Gemara that we will read tomorrow. The Gemara is going to go through these different events and tell us at this event, because of what was going on, they stopped X celebration. Because of this event, they stopped X celebration. And that's, God willing, we'll get to tomorrow. So this is some interesting history and background to that. Okay, wonderful day, Eden.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
I was thinking about this,
Yeah.
the water celebration that they do for Sukkot.
That was a big flashpoint, but they never would have stopped it. The Commissioner is going to talk about things the sages stopped. The sages would have never stopped that, but the water pouring was a big flashpoint between the Sadducees and the rest of the Jewish people, essentially. So it's an amazing thing. Even while the Sadducees held power, including the Temple Mount, the Jews who were following the sages still went to the temple because this is God's temple.
Right.
So it's a very confusing time. Like imagine you're coming to shul and the leadership is completely opposite to what you believe, right? And you're following people who aren't even in power. It creates this whole confusion. Very, very confusing time. A lot of strife and confusion and finger pointing and blaming and blood on the streets.
And the divisions that were created because of this type of, which only would have had the strength to be united.
Yeah. It reverberated for centuries.
Absolutely. Very relevant.
Yep.
Always.
This absolutely, it happened later again too. When like the Haskalah movement invited like it didn't make it to blood on the streets, but they enlisted, for example, the power of the czars to impose religious rule on the rest of the Jews. It wasn't the czars who wanted to clamp down on Jewish education. It was the Haskalah who entreated the czars to clamp down on Jewish education.
Similar.
Very similar kind of things. Anyway, have a wonderful day, Eden.
All the very best.
Thank you.